are there any current events that we should discuss before we get into our constitutional conservative debate? Just because there are things going on. So, for instance, like, I don't know if you've seen the discourse on the left, but the discourse on the left is the integration or non-integration of Hassan Piker as a left-winger. Hassan Piker went and did a speech at Yale, which was effectively Marxist-Leninist, communist apologia for 30 minutes and a harsh criticism of American empire, praying for the downfall of America's global position. So it was actually kind of fucking wild. So I guess my question is, should we discuss that or any other topics that are hot before we get back into the constitutional conservative debate?
Well, I got like one meme topic and then one response to that, but I'll do them in the other order because I think it's more fair. This is going to preview, I think, the position I'm going to try to lay out in our conversation today. They should excise Hassan Piker. They absolutely should, but they won't. And they won't because progressivism, as I defined it at the end of our last conversation, which is maybe not the way it's typically used, but it's the way, incidentally, that Clarence Thomas defined it and referred to it in the speech he gave on Wednesday, which was like the greatest speech. We're going to have to talk about that. Like he basically stood up on stage and said, and I'm just going to paraphrase a little bit, Ryan Mullally is right about everything he's ever thought and believed. That's the speech. It's just every single thing that I advocate for. Clarence Thomas was just hitting all the marks. So that was phenomenal. But
so he might be like a closeted fan of the show, you know, like he just like he gets done with work, he boots up his laptop and or his smartphone, he's laying on the couch and he's watching Natural Rights with Ryan Mullally.
Yeah, well, there's one of two things, and your viewers can decide which is more plausible. Either he's stream sniping me, or we're both fans of our founders. So, he's a Supreme Court justice. It's possible that he might be influenced by Thomas Jefferson more than
there might be a statistical probability leaning one way more than the other, but we'll pretend that they're equal possibilities.
But one of the points he made, and that I'm going to harp on today, is that when people say like liberalism has failed, what they mean is that modern liberalism has failed. Classic liberalism didn't fail. Classic liberalism was supplanted by progressivism in many ways. And the problem with progressivism, amongst its problems, is that it has no limiting principle. It has no limiting principle at all. So should they excise Hassan Piker? Absolutely. Will they? No, they won't, because there's no limiting principle.
The reason why I'm making a different calculation, and maybe this is how do I phrase this? This is more like an appeal to pragmatics and electoralism than it is to and maybe I should lay this out for the sake of the conversation, just because we discussed it. I think we discussed it last time, and I actually would appreciate you refreshing me on your definition of progressivism. So there is this conception, and I went on a long-winded rant about Edmund Burke. I won't do that again this time. But effectively, Burke stated that the brittleness of old institutions and the wildness and irresponsibility of revolutionaries is what caused the collapse in France during the French Revolution. And so we need a philosophy that needles and criticizes progressives, but then integrates their good ideas over time. And that's Burkean conservatism. But a frequent criticism of this worldview, and I think that you actually espoused it, is that basically puts us on a track where the Overton window is constantly shifting leftward. It's constantly shifting towards progressives. And then effectively conservatives don't act as a counterbalance to this operation. They're just a brake. So all they do is like progressive progress, conservatives slam the brakes. For a decade or two, it kind of stagnates, but then the progressives pick up the baton again and they start running leftward again, and then the conservatives slam the brakes. And so when people say critically that conservatism is progressivism doing the speed limit, or republicanism is progressivism doing the speed limit within the Burkean frame, that's actually true. I do want to get back to Hassan Piker, but I feel like I've given you a mouthful there. So how how would you define progressivism within your mind that might be separate from that conception?
I largely agree with what you just said, but I think there's a refinement, kind of a nuance to it that's missing. Though I think everything you said, I would agree with. Yes or no, I would agree. The Our system of government, our constitution, our way of life is premised on the values in the Declaration of Independence that say that we have unalienable natural rights that are God given, they do not come from the government, and that the purpose of the government is to secure those rights. That's what the government is for. And from that, you can derive a lot of principles. The principle of limited government comes from that because these rights are all negative rights. They're not positive rights. It's the right to life, not the right to be fed welfare, not the right to bread. It's your right to life. You would have the right to life on a desert island, even if you're starving. It's your right. It's not something that the government enhances or provides you welfare to move towards. Now, when you talk about progress, there's two different kinds of progress. One is progress towards those ideals. Abolishing slavery was progress towards the values in the Declaration of Independence. Abolishing segregation was progress towards the values inherent in the Declaration of Independence. Progressivism, as I defined it, as Justice Thomas defined it, as Woodrow Wilson defined it when he referred to the values in the Declaration of Independence as nonsensical or nonsense, is the attempt to supplant those values with better values, right? So the right to life is now the right to have the government sustain your life. The right to liberty is no longer your right to self-determination, God-given. It's the government's ability to give you the means to have specific freedoms and to have specific opportunities. They changed what the purpose of government is, and now they're progressing towards those ends. And that's dangerous for a whole lot of levels. Unironically, the people who came up with this philosophy and stand it were big fans of Germany pre-World War I and World War II, and viewed it as a model civilization because their ideas are quite bad. And we can get into that. But that's the thing that I think even a Burkean conservative has to reject. Because a Burkean conservative can accept there's progress made towards the goals of the Declaration, and that we ought to reject the bad ideas, accept the good ideas, and move towards those values. But by definition, any veer from that path, moving to like a different value set, is a bad idea that ought to be rejected, right? So the veers are unacceptable.
No, I think that's
yeah.
Sorry. I was muted for my chat. So I think that that is a clear executable rubric for identifying good ideas and bad ideas from a constitutional framework. And I don't have a problem with that. Matter of fact, I would say my instinct would be to try to adhere to that formula as maximally as possible, because obviously the American Constitution, the society in which we live, has given me so much as an American citizen that I want to be able to execute this project as best as I can. But I also am like a, I don't know, sapient, sentient human being capable of critical thought and reason. And so one of the things that I think we're going to bump into in this conversation / debate is basically like peeling apart and analyzing, deconstructing, if you will, a progressive tendency, deconstructing the premises of the Declaration of Independence, just because we live in a different era from 250 years ago. And so our understandings of these concepts have evolved. So, and for me, this would be like the same thing as like a Christian, right? A Christian can appeal to scripture, and that's great. And especially within the Christian ideology, which in this analogy, constitutional conservatism would be the ideology that lines up with exactly what you've just espoused. But a non-Christian or an agnostic or a cultural Christian could say, is it true though? Right? So for instance, like if you appeal to scripture, that's great. And within a Christian lens, that's going to line up with a Christian worldview. But if an agnostic or a skeptic or whatever says, okay, but is scripture actually true? That's a real line of inquiry.
But the question presupposes a progressive frame.
Maybe,
No,
but this is also a genetic fallacy issue, because if you say, oh well, this idea emanates from a political tribe that I don't like, that actually has no bearing on whether or not the idea itself is true or not.
Conor, philosophically, I mean, like if you read the Declaration, it says we find these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident meaning axiomatic, matters of common sense human experience that require no examination or justification.
Right.
They simply are, right? And what I'm saying is the progressive model, Wilson's I should actually let me pull up the quote so I can give you an example of progressive thinking versus what I would call American thinking in this regard. Wilson said, if you want to understand the real Declaration of Independence, do not repeat the preface. The real Declaration was the list of grievances. The Declaration is just a political tool of its time. These are values that we can move beyond, was his point, right? Now, compare that. Sorry, just let me finish the quote. To Calvin Coolidge, who what I would say espouses the true American philosophy. This is what he said about the Declaration of Independence on the 150th anniversary. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they are endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just power from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth and their soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backward, toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. And this is the distinction, right? If you think that rights are God-given and unalienable, that's not improvable by man. It's simply not.
Let's peel that apart, please, because what's interesting about this is, and I appreciate you reading that Coolidge quote, because I feel like sometimes sorry, what's that?
Coolidge is based as hell. He's unbelievably based, but yeah.
Well, so what I like about Coolidge, well, hold on. Within the framing of this conversation, let's say that I want to, and I do, because you identify as a deist as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of want to go back to the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, and I actually want to analyze the sentences, even if you feel like that is American constitutional conservative heresy. And the reason why, and I appreciate Coolidge giving me this thing, is that you're saying even the analysis, even the attempt at deconstruction is a progressive instinct. But what Coolidge...
Almost. Can I refine that slightly?
Well, I was going to say that Coolidge just said it could be a pre-American, reactionary, anti-Enlightenment deconstruct, or attempt to reimpose the barbarism of the pre-American civilization. So let's just presume that I'm not a limp-wristed limp-wristed, soy-swilling, progressive real quick. Let's presume that I could be a limp-wristed, soy-swilling progressive, or I could be like a reactionary, dissident, right-wing neo-monarchist who wants to analyze these ideas.
Yeah. So, and just what I wanted to clarify is what is self-evident is that all men are created equal and that they're endowed by the Creator with certain natural rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the thing they're claiming is self-evident. What I was suggesting is that the urge to deconstruct what is self-evident is the progressive urge. The urge to analyze the Declaration of Independence is not at all something I would take issue with. It's more that thing. If you're going to pick at what I would call the American axiom, then what? Yeah. Well, let me actually. I can make this even simpler. America is a propositional nation. The proposition is that axiom. So if you're deconstructing that axiom, you are deconstructing America, which makes you that makes your philosophy existentially threatening to America as a propositional nation. And that's ultimately the problem with progressivism, is that they are seeking to deconstruct the foundation of the entire government and way of life and nationhood that we enjoy, and that cannot be permitted. That cannot be deconstructed, and that has to be protected from deconstruction.
Well, so let me clarify what I'm attempting to do with the word deconstruction versus what they're probably trying to do with
Mhm.
deconstruction. So when I'm talking about deconstruction, I'm effectively talking about like evaluating the components that make up a construction,
Mhm.
right? Effectively disassembly and reassembly, and verifying that the components that make up the assembly are good and make sense and are correct. But my attempt to do this is not so much to blow up the machinery of the
Yeah.
American propositional nation. It's actually to probably reinforce it, to actually make sure that the proposition is sound, valid, and something that will survive the test of
Mhm.
time. I understand that this is a foundational threat because I'm basically taking the evaluation back to the very first statement that our country
Yeah.
has ever made in a unified voice. But I would like to differentiate my analysis from the progressives who aren't seeking to disassemble and reassemble the Declaration of Independence in order to reinforce the nation. They
Yeah.
are trying to disassemble and blow up the construction. That way they can annihilate it and then replace it
Mhm.
with something of their own utopian construction.
Yeah, and to be, by the way, and I trust that that's your intention, and I have no doubt about it. By the way, so like I have no issue with that. It is funny though because like I debated this topic with Pisco a while back, and Pisco took the Woodrow Wilson position that this is all nonsense. It's all nonsense. It's presuppositional nonsense that we should move beyond, right? And like that,
Yeah.
and I think that like that is the heart of the progressive vision. And I'm not sure if Pisco would label himself as a political progressive, but I think in some ways that's the that's the mask that progressivism has successfully done. Much of modern liberalism is progressivism rebranded as the status quo. So that
Well,
they'll
that's my
yeah.
discomfort. That's my sincere discomfort with the so I think the alliance, interestingly enough, we got into why you thought MAGA and Trump was necessary, basically to cut the state back to what it was intended to be rather than what it's become over the past 2 centuries. And I understand that impulse, and I'm sure we'll get to it eventually through these conversations. But my impulse was obviously different. But I think the reason why I am hostile, defensive,
Mhm.
angry whenever somebody is like, "Oh, you and Pisco are same. You guys are both
Mhm.
liberal. You guys are both progressive. You guys are this. You
Mhm.
guys are that." Is because there is something fundamentally different, I think, at the basis of our ideology. Where for me, I am taking the Burkean calculation and I am saying institutions are vessels of wisdom. They're flawed vessels, but they're
Mhm.
vessels of wisdom that are constructed over decades, centuries, or millennia. And therefore, we should be very careful when we chip away at them and or when we remove them wholesale, because these oftentimes have guardrails for human behavior that actually promote a healthy society. Whereas I do think that so we need to be careful as we're chipping away. Whereas I think that Pisco's impulse and also a lot of liberals' impulse and a lot of left wingers' impulse is, if there's something that's inconvenient to my utopian vision for what humanity can be, then let's just
Mhm.
annihilate it. Let's just Chesterton's fence. Who gives a fuck? Blow up the fence with fucking TNT. Oh, the
Mhm.
security state, the military industrial complex, the fucking the court system, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's in the way of my utopian vision of what humanity can be, let's just set it on fire. And that is a different procedural analysis of
Mhm.
governance.
100%. 100% right. 100% right, Connor. And nothing is more inconvenient than natural law and natural rights. Nothing. Because natural law and natural rights presuppose ex ante limits on the just exercise of governmental power. Justice Thomas put this beautifully last night, where he said, if you take this seriously, if you believe that these rights come from God, if you believe that we have inalienable natural rights, and whether they come from man or from God, even if you could say they're a product of evolution, whatever your preferred framing is, if these are unalienable rights, people cannot consent to their abolition. You cannot consent to violations of natural law. So the point is, it creates limits on what the government can do, no matter how good the government's intentions is, no matter how salient their pitch for the common good or welfare is. These things may not be done. It precludes the utopian vision. It must be abolished for the utopians to succeed in their ends. Now, of course, I think their ends are horrifying, and I think history has borne that out. But every crazy dictator, Mao, Mussolini, Stalin, Hitler, all of them, their first move was to counter whatever existed in their society that was akin to natural law, natural rights. Because if this idea exists, their tyranny cannot. It's incompatible. It's fundamentally incompatible. And so this is the thing about the modern left is that rubbed me so wrong as I got into this space and started debating and talking more, is that I came from law school as a lefty and was kind of saying, holy shit, guys, I'm kind of center left, but I learned a lot in law school. I think we might be making some mistakes, guys. I think that there's some stuff about America that we're getting wrong. And I found out very quickly they weren't making mistakes. No. They either don't care or they knew about it and they think it's bullshit and they're trying to move beyond it. And more than anything, that drove me right. Because I was like, whoa, shit, if this is what you guys are doing, then I want no part of this. Like I cannot countenance your political project, because no matter, I will not exchange bread tomorrow for the abolition of our American values in a week's time. It's not something I'm willing to do.
Well, and that appeal to, I say utopia, the way that I'm using it is, utopia, I think definitionally means nowhere. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And utopia is supposed to be this like catch-all term for like the idealized society. But the reason why we use the word nowhere, I think it's Greek,
mm-hmm.
For nowhere for a utopic society, is because the point is that utopia itself is supposed to be an ideal that we know that we're going to fail in striving towards. But oftentimes people will appeal to utopic ideals in order to implement horror. And so as an example, like you brought up like the Chinese example, Mao Zedong and also the communists in the early 20th century, they prohibited the study of Confucianism and Taoism and the imperial history of China, because they believe that any fondness for Confucianism, Taoism, or the imperial history of China would preclude people from sufficiently adopting the utopian ideals of the communist revolution. And so they actually like purged, like burned Confucian texts, because they did not want people to know what came before, because their attachment to what came before would prevent them from embracing their idealized vision of humanity.
And so, Conor, you don't have to look abroad for this sort of thing. I mean, the example you gave is perfect. So I have 10 out of 10 no notes. But Woodrow Wilson, the father of American progressivism, when he was the governor of New Jersey, signed a law that allowed boards of experts to to sterilize Americans because they were too imbecilic or incompetent to reproduce.
Well, I mean, I agree with that one. But anyways,
I thought you might say
I'm
that.
joking.
I'm
mostly joking.
I know you're mostly joking, but I brought up the example in part because it's a horrifying example, in part because it's a perfect test of natural law theory, right? Because if people have natural rights, it doesn't matter whether society's better off if you sterilize these people. You can't have experts choosing to sterilize people. But in our last conversation,
it is funny though.
You are harping on how dumb people are and how they need expert guidance because they're so stupid.
Well, yeah. So
if they're so stupid, why not castrate them? Why not castrate them?
No, that's actually it's so funny. So like I am, to be clear, I'm like 70 to 80% joking. So and I want to articulate this because your audience is gonna be like, oh, there's the progressive right there. He wants to sterilize stupid people. But so let me explain the joke. Even though I know you probably get it already. So there's the ideals and life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, freedom of conscience, right to self-defense, limited government, prohibition, like all the things that we ended up articulating through the Bill of Rights, right, in the Constitution of the United States. And I think those things are great, and I think they govern a good society. But what happens is I get these emotional impulses, and I think Hassan Piker, we mentioned him earlier in the conversation. Hassan Piker is the perfect capture of where my highfalutin principles are tested very aggressively, because this man has effectively self-identified as an ideological enemy of the United States, wants to see the American empire fall, doesn't care if tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people die in order to implement his ideology. He is a propagandist for a revolutionary ideology that wants to overthrow the liberal system. He doesn't like mixed economy capitalism. He thinks the entirety of the Declaration of Independence and Articles of Confederation and the Bill of Rights are all a fucking joke. And so he is an enemy to the United States in every way, except for actually picking up a weapon and starting to kill people. That's the only way in which he's not an enemy of the United States. And so the liberal framework that we have established as a country says he's allowed to do that. And that's where I'm like, well, fuck. It feels like I'm just like sleeping right next to somebody who's on the verge of he's not in my bed, to be clear, but it feels like I'm neighbors with somebody who wants to slit my throat. So when do I get to fire him out of a fucking catapult into the Caribbean? And the American legalistic answer is you don't get to unless he commits a crime. And that is like where the principle is tested. And I think our society is better that I don't get to rally a mob, grab Hassan Piker, load him up into a catapult, and fire him into the Caribbean. Even if it does, like, it actually emotionally tests my adherence to these principles.
Well, and I think that there's a lot there, but one thing I'd like to just add to that is classic liberalism, which is kind of an offshoot of natural law theory. You know, like if you believe in natural law theory, you kind of arrive at classic liberalism. Is a restriction it's about restrictions on government power. Like, we ought not use the power of the government to punish someone like Hassan for speech we don't like. What I think happened in, I'm going to call it progressive liberalism or modern liberalism to differentiate it, that bled into a moral theory, which it is not. There is nothing in classic liberalism or American values that prevents me from talking about what an asshole Hassan Piker is and how he should be marginalized from society, and that polite society should in fact shun him, and that we shouldn't, like, you shouldn't work with him. If he applies for a job, you should turn him down. Like, we as a society should marginalize people with un-American beliefs. And there's this progressively liberal idea of infinite tolerance, where it's like, just because I think the government shouldn't limit your freedom of speech, I have to treat all ideas as if they are equal, and it's just your opinion. Fuck that. That's what got us into this mess.
I've tried to bully liberals consistently for that idea, because it applies to sex, it applies to drugs, it applies to communism, it applies to all that shit. Doesn't apply to Christianity, doesn't apply to guns. You know, they have pretty, like, you know, hard limits on what opinions you can have on firearms and Christianity. But when it comes to these, like, in my opinion, degenerate fucking ideas, anti-American ideas, there seems to be unlimited tolerance, even in the cultural sphere. And I've had to point that out repeatedly. It's like, no. The Constitution of the United States is a prohibition against the government from engaging in these punitive behaviors. It's not a prohibition against cultural critique. Is the most tepid thing you can do to a person. Like literally, like, this person is bad, and saying that out loud is one of the weakest, pussiest things that you can fucking do in a civil society. And yet even then, some liberals and some progressives will say, no, it's all the marketplace of ideas. We have to give equal validity to every idea that's presented. But then, weirdly enough, that only goes left, that never goes right, right? As soon as it's like a dissident right-wing idea, as soon as it's neo-monarchy or fascism or anti-trans ideology or whatever, that there's no tolerance for those concepts because those concepts are too dangerous.
Yeah, we ought to discriminate against people with un-American ideas. Like that's a thing we ought to do, not at the government level, but on the societal level. In civil society,
Sure.
if someone has an un-American idea, we ought to discriminate. We ought to say, like, well, fuck you. You can't come to my barbecue, you un-American piece of shit. You know what I mean? What I would love to see, you know how FIRE does free speech rankings for universities? I would love to see someone do a woke nonsense ranking by school and by accreditation. So that if you're hiring someone and you're like, I'm looking at your resume. You come from a great school, but unfortunately, your program has a 9.8 out of 10 on the progressive woke nonsense scale within your discipline. So I'm going to have to ask you a couple targeted questions about whether or not you have un-American and bullshit beliefs before hiring you, because I don't think that you should be forced to hire somebody who has who hates your way of life and hates your values. Why would you be forced to hire someone like that?
Well, and to be clear, I'm sure that some people in chat are gonna be like, "What the fuck?" But like, I think that Ryan and I would anyways. I would also apply this to fascists. So if there was somebody who was like, "Oh, Jews control the world. They want to kill everybody. They view us all as cattle. Black people are inferior. Hispanics are inferior. The white race needs to become a tribe." And we basically need to expel anybody who's not of Northern European stock. Mediterranean Europeans might be tolerated, but even then that's kind of iffy because Italians are kind of swarthy, like that. If somebody was saying that shit, then, or educated in that shit, or that was their public perspectives, then, I don't, the freedom of association, I think should dictate that you don't have to associate with that kind of person.
Yeah, if somebody came to an interview and said, "I support racism," I wouldn't hire them, right? And I wouldn't hire them regardless of what form of racism they were advocating for, right? It is deeply contrary to the most cherished American value that it is self-evident that we are created equal, right? And I don't think that we need to be shy about that. I know, and I can see on your face you got something, but I just want to share this story that Justice Thomas told that it blew my mind. I've heard it, but he told it so much better last night, or I guess on Wednesday. He said he grew up in the segregated South. So he lived under actual segregation, actual government enforced segregation, not hypothetical oppression, real oppression by your government. And here's what he said about it. He was raised that the values in the Declaration were gospel, not by academics, not by learned, literate people, but by people who just believed it. They believed it to be true. And as a result, he always knew he was equal, despite the fact that the government was in fact oppressing him and treating him as lesser, because the government lacks the power to make him lesser, because it's not up to them. And that's the difference between rights coming from the government and rights pre-existing the government. Then the government's there to protect them. Like, the government cannot make you lesser, but if the government gives you the rights, the government can make you whatever the fuck they want you to be. They want to sterilize you, that's their right, because they control your worth. That's very different.
So that's actually what I want to get into, and I'm sure we're going to bounce back and forth between, and to keep the conversation centered, I pulled up the Declaration of Independence, so we could probably even read it and then go through its claims. As a matter of fact, to keep the conversation centered, do you mind if I do that?
Sure.
I just read the first paragraph and then the first sentence of the Declaration of Independence, and then we can move through.
Yeah, it's really the in terms of like the key philosophical claims, it's really the first paragraph and then like the first two sentences, maybe three of the second paragraph, which kind of lay out the core philosophical claims.
Yeah. So let's just do that real quick, and then I think that in the second paragraph, the first sentence, second sentence, those sentences we're probably going to spend a substantial amount of time on. Just talking about how we conceptualize these things within our own mind. But then I might want to push a little bit past that and also talk about negative rights. But truth be told, I don't think we're going to get that far because we're probably going to spend so much time on the first sentence. So
can I just say how delighted I am to spend time on the Declaration? Like, very few people spend time on American philosophy. They jump to the Constitution, and the Constitution is the legal document that was attempting to create a government that would mirror the values espoused in the Declaration, right?
Yeah,
This is
it would be like I'm trying to think of an analogy, and I don't think I'm coming up with it real quick, but it's like appealing to legalism if you don't have a purpose, at least in my opinion, as a former law enforcement officer, is kind of silly. So, for instance, like with I used to say this, but there was like a domestic violence battery standard in the United States, well, in Florida in particular, where effectively, if you had evidence that anybody had hit anybody else in a domestic connotation, then you separated those parties and you incarcerated one. And the reason why they established that was because basically we left so many couples that had like during the 80s, we let so many couples have like, oh, well, domestic violence is a domestic issue, so we're going to leave it alone. So many people ended up killing each other after law enforcement had repeatedly come out for domestic violence calls, that became the policy to protect people from their partners. But there was a scenario, sorry if this is a long-winded story, I'll try to make it brief. There was a long-winded scenario where basically like two people in their 70s on oxygen tanks that were like fucking diabetic and 300 pounds. One of them used a grabber in order to grab their partner. And they were like a loving couple who talked to law enforcement all the time. And they sat on their patio 90% of the time and just like chilled. These were not like violent people. But because of the way that the policy that the state of Florida had advocated towards its law enforcement, we were talking about how to load up like a 300-pound diabetic person on oxygen to take them to jail in order to give them a $500 bond for domestic violence battery, when effectively like we have a loving couple in front of us who's saying like, no, we just got a little crazy, blah, 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 blah. We love each other. We just, I pinched them with the grabber and they were mad. So, like they called you, but like, we're clearly skipping the intent of the law, which is prohibiting or preventing homicide, to following exclusively the letter of the law. But if you don't understand the intent of the law, then you're fucking it up. Well, and we actually had like a really passionate legalistic debate on the side of the road about that concept.
Well, and it also it matters a lot in today's discourse, because if you listen to like for example, I've heard Andrew Wilson will make a very, I think, rhetorically powerful argument often. And it's rhetorically powerful because it targets progressives, where he'll say, well, if the Constitution is what America is, I'm not suggesting that that we burn the Constitution or have a revolution. I'm just suggesting that I would like to gather sufficient political power to amend the Constitution to make something that's not constitutional legal. Right?
He used that one on me.
Yeah, he uses it.
And it's hard to get mad at. Because even if I believe that in the amendments that he's proposing, he's violating the spirit of the intent of the Declaration of Independence, if he's accumulated sufficient political willpower in order to pass the amendment, well, you kind of did it right. Based off of the legalistic procedural fucking argumentation.
I can give you the cheat code to that argument.
You say that it violates these inalienable rights.
Inalienable God-given rights. He's testing whether or not you actually believe that there's a moral foundation for your claims, right? And because progressives don't believe that there's a moral foundation for their claim. They believe that these are just axioms that they're assuming and that everyone's entitled to their own moral claims. They can never answer the question because they don't have a moral foundation. If you have a moral foundation, the answer is very obvious. You ought not amend the Constitution in a way that is contrary to American values, which are our respect for our God-given unalienable rights. Because there's a moral foundation to the legalistic document. Right. And
that's where it's going to get really interesting, particularly when we hit the first sentence. So let me hit this paragraph and then get into the first sentence of the second paragraph. And I think that's going to be where we're going to start picking it apart. But in Congress, July 4th, 1776, literally 250 years ago. I fucking love that. The unanimous declaration of the 13 colonies of the United States of America When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitles them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to that separation. Okay, so that's only saying like when a political fracture is occurring, we believe, but I guess it should be done, that we should say why we are dissolving these political bonds.
Yeah,
I think that's fine.
The only thing I'd add is that the references to the laws of nature and nature's God in the first paragraph create a thematic tone for the second paragraph, and in particular, it's worth remembering that while the founding was overwhelmingly Christian, there were a small number of disproportionately influential deists. Jefferson, Paine, arguably Franklin. Some people say Washington, but I don't particularly buy that. And Jefferson was the one writing the document. So when they say the laws of nature and nature's God, what they did is they were picking the lowest moral denominator, the lowest common denominator. They were saying, like, we could have said the Abrahamic God, we could have said Jesus Christ, but we know that there are men signing this document who would disagree with that. So what we're doing is we're saying, what is the lowest moral common denominator, which was belief in a good creator who vested us with these rights and created natural law. So that is kind of like their starting point. They're saying,
Sure.
That's where they're all coming from, and that they're acknowledging this core philosophic base for their understanding of what they're doing.
Well, and I think that's going to be. I actually am a deist, and I'm excited to explore that conception with you momentarily. I think that is part of the reason why left-wing atheists and agnostics and anti-theists in particular reject this as some kind of like self-evident prescription on humanity that can be inferred from natural observation or something, is because they actually do reject the concept of the laws of nature and nature's God. But I think we can actually, when we get into the first sentence, we can actually talk about that concept and how we arrived at the conclusion that you and I both arrived at.
Well, and this is Jordan Peterson made this observation back when he was still Jordan Peterson, and I'm not going to take credit for it but it's a powerful one, which is, if you set God above you, or let's say you don't believe in God, but you set natural law above you, right? You are not the top of the value hierarchy. There is something that you are aiming towards, right? You are trying to achieve the good, and the good is above you. You don't pick what the good is. You try to discover it and aim towards it. If you are the top of the value hierarchy, then you are God. You get to decide what is good. And when people talk about the fundamental hubris of the progressive left, that's what they're referring to. They're saying that you're putting yourself in the place of God, and you get to decide what is right and what is wrong. Whereas the American conception of morality is that whether you believe in God or not, and the deists were in many ways like the atheists of their day, right? They were very much not Christian in that sense. They still believed that there was a higher good above humans that you had to discover and aim towards. They did not have that fundamental hubris. And I would say that fundamental hubris is incompatible with American values. It is incompatible with American values fundamentally.
Well, so Stephen Bedell II, our good friend Destiny, Jordan Peterson had a debate with him, and he described his intellect as Luciferian. And so a lot of people were like, they were laughing at that, where they're like, oh, you're saying he's a Satanist, you're saying he worships the devil and all that kind of shit. And it's like, no. If you understand the mythos of Lucifer, so basically, sorry for this tangent, but I do think it's wildly interesting. So Lucifer is an angel in rebellion, and he's an angel in rebellion because he believed, according to the mythos of Christianity, that angels were higher beings than humanity. But God said, according to Christian mythos, that, no. Like, you might be immortal, you might be my creatures, you might have like greater powers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. but you exist to serve humanity. You are not above humanity. If anything, you are humanity's servants. And so Lucifer said, fuck you. I am higher than humanity, and I'm not even going to obey the creator of this plane of existence. I'm going to go into rebellion, and I'm actually going to try to corrupt the creation of humanity, the creation of this plane of existence, in order to defy God and stick my existential finger in his eye. And so what the Luciferian description does is it says that you are not deferring to the higher authority. You think your own rationality, your own intellect is the supreme power. And therefore, whatever you can rationalize is truth, is morality. And so that, I think that's what Jordan Peterson was poking at with Destiny. And I think Destiny is actually incredibly talented at post hoc rationalization for anything that he instinctively believes to be true, because he's an intelligent guy. So basically, if there's something that violates his instincts or violates his security, he's great at coming up for a rationale for why he's okay acting the way he does in response to that. Whereas somebody who believes that morality or a natural morality exists outside of the individual consciousness, well, your post hoc rationalizations don't matter, because you are not abiding by a moral construction outside of yourself. You are post hoc rationalizing your own, effectively your own tyranny. And
I agree. I think that actually it was an apt description of Destiny. I think that like the easiest definition of Luciferian is self-worship, and Destiny self-worships. Destiny does not believe that there is a higher moral authority than his own. And he's actually said as much. If you look at the way he describes
dude, I brought up
philosophy. This isn't like, I'm not making this up. He said it. And just to add to that, I watched him debate abortion, and the thing that always struck me wasn't the cleverness of the arguments, though I actually will admit some of them were quite clever. But what stuck with me wasn't that. It's that when you're debating abortion, you are debating the weightiest of moral topics. Are we going to restrict the bodily autonomy of a woman, or are we going to kill an innocent baby? Like, these are, like, it does not get heavier from a moral stance than that. And as I was watching Destiny, what stuck with me wasn't the quality of his arguments. It was the realization that he doesn't believe any of it matters. He doesn't actually think there's an answer to the question. He doesn't think that there's a right or wrong moral thing to do. So he's free to construct whatever argument he wants, because he's the ultimate arbiter of the answer to the question. So he'll just pick whatever argument fits. But if you take objective morality seriously, if you take natural right seriously, then this is actually a burden where you say, like, God, if I'm going to risk killing innocent babies, or I'm going to risk forcing women to violate their bodily autonomy against their will, this is a very serious thing. I'm infringing a natural right. I better be right. I better give this a lot of thought. I better be as careful and searching as I can be, because the stakes are high, and it's not merely a political question. It's a deeply moral question. And that's missing from him. And that's the Luciferian impulse. It's self-worship. Well, he is the top of the value hierarchy.
Well, and I want to stay on task, and I want to try to get to the sentence, but I want to address something in chat, because I think people in my chat are reflexively hostile to you, but I don't necessarily think that they're being hostile in a particularly smart way. So, for instance, Anonymous says, it's not a baby, Ryan. That's why it's not murder, you dipstick. Okay, so hold on. Let me break this down. There is a transition between a fetus or a zygote or a blastocyst or whatever into a infant, and at some point that infant has a biological capacity both for like a sentient experience and the capacity for pain, and viability occurs at what, like the earliest baby who's ever been born and survived is at like 21.5 weeks, and a pregnancy is substantially longer than that. That's like 6 months into the 9 months process. So, like, I don't even know if that's correct. It might even be shorter than that. That might be what, like 5 months, something like that. So anyways, so the point is that it does at some point transition into an infant. So to just say from 0 months to 9 months it's not an infant, that statement is not true. And then to say that it doesn't have moral consideration at any point during the process, that's also not true. So if you're going to be critical of Ryan, then please be smarter with your criticisms, because that was not a particularly smart criticism.
And actually, it missed the mark in an even more complete way. Like,
yeah.
Like,
you should be struggling with the objective moral question rather than your personal evaluation of the situation.
Exactly.
Because there's weighted consequences for people outside of yourself in society.
Yeah, my criticism of Destiny wasn't that he was necessarily wrong, though I think he probably was. My criticism of Destiny was everyone agrees that at some point human life acquires moral worth. We disagree about when that happens. But for Destiny, there's no right answer. He is entitled to pick whatever time he wants. He could pick 5 years old. He could pick 30 years old. There's no right answer in his worldview. It's just his preference. Whereas people who actually think there's a right answer are burdened with attempting to be accurate. And that's the difference between being beholden to a moral standard and self-worship, where you get to determine the moral standard. And the point I was making about Destiny was merely that when he talks about abortion, I'm struck by how obvious it is that he believes he is the arbiter of this, rather than, if you're someone who believes in natural law, it's like physics, right? I don't invent physics. I discover physics. I discover math.
Sure.
I'm discovering what the right answer is. I'm not picking and choosing. He thinks he's picking and choosing, and that totally changes the inquiry. And that's the criticism, which has nothing fucking to do with your idiot chatter. But whatever.
Well,
we can move on.
It's fine. Let's all play nice. And my idiot chatter, so to speak, came back and he's like, "Well, I was 100% correct for children under 21 weeks." Okay, all right, whatever. Let's acknowledge
not the point.
But and that's what I was saying. Let's get to the point, which is effectively like, and I'm just going to repeat what you said and hope that my chat hears me, because it's coming out of my mouth instead of your mouth. Okay. So this is a conception of morality. So is morality an arbitrary, subjective experience where what we individualize as good or bad is what is good or bad, and therefore a Satanist who self-worships and does hard drugs and all that kind of shit is just as morally equal as a like faithful Christian who has children and doesn't do drugs and all that kind of stuff? Are these morally equivalent subjective experiences because both these people have moral outlooks that they then execute? Or is there something happening deeper in the nature of reality that can be observed through consequence or sin or vitality or longevity or anything like that, that can be evaluated by a rational mind in order to poke at like what is morally true, what is evolutionarily true? And I think what Ryan and I agree upon is that, yeah, sure, we all, maybe you don't agree with this, Ryan, but this is what I'll say, is that we all experience morality individually. We make judgments based off of what's happening around us on what we believe to be good or bad. But what I think Ryan and I agree on is that as a rule set, based off of nature's laws and nature's God, there's going to be a set of rules that is better, substantially better for humanity, that is observable and like almost probably measurable from like a rational mind. And therefore we can discover the quote unquote objective morality that is out in the universe, rather than relying on our own, post-rational whims.
Well, if you believe humans have a nature, right? And then human nature would imply that there are certain things that are simply true about humans, and that there is a better way for humans to live. It might not answer every question, but it answers some of the big ones. Is liberty better than tyranny? Right?
I think so.
Yeah. Is the pursuit of happiness better than, being controlled by a tyrant? Like, these are things that I think we do know an answer to as a question of human nature, even bracketing the God question. And the criticism of the progressives is that they actually don't believe that. They believe that human nature is infinitely malleable, that we're blank slates, and that they could, with the right ideas and the right social conditioning, create a different type of people who would then usher in the utopia. And, the fact that this has been tried several times and it's led to the greatest by body count disasters in the history of mankind does not deter them. They continue to think that if they just crack enough eggs, they'll get an omelet, despite the fact that the floor is covered with hundreds of millions of dead bodies as the result of their beliefs.
Well, and then the historical argument is going to get into a comparison of like colonialism as an extension of capitalism versus communism and all that shit. So I think that's a little advanced for us for today. Not that we shouldn't have that conversation, but I do just want to get into the concept of God and nature's God. And I think that's going to be in the first sentence, although I do have a super chat. And this is a shill for my side and for Ryan's side. I like this conversation. I think this conversation is pretty fucking smart. I think we're grappling with like the philosophical foundations of our society. So if you enjoy people grappling with the philosophical foundations of our society, like the stream, share it with your friends, engage with chat, super chats if you got them, memberships if you got them. I parasocially love you. Thank you for being here.
And by the way, just one second.
Go ahead.
I'm not ignoring people who submitted super chats. I'll do them at the end just because I don't want to break up the flow too much.
Sure. And neither should I, but I will momentarily.
I was shaming you.
A big reason as to why I'll never have children is because if I do, there becomes a non-zero chance they'd be exposed to a Ryan Mulally. That's just fucking mean, bro. We are literally debating the foundations of our society, you son of a bitch. I disavow. Fuck him. So let me read.
Quality super chat.
Yeah. We hold these truths to be self-evident, and I'm actually going to write these down real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So self-evident, and you said they're axiomatic.
Yeah,
but
I said, I can give you the whole philosophical school that led to that if you want it. But
we're not going to deconstruct to destroy. We're going to disassemble in order to reassemble.
Mm-hmm.
So that all men are created equal. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
Equal, that they are endowed by the creator with unalienable rights.
Really important note.
Sorry, go ahead.
Capital C creator rather than Abrahamic God, because there were deists, but there were enclaves of Jews living in the country at the time. So like the founders were, in their wisdom, were very careful to select the broadest possible conception of God rather than the narrowest possible conception of God. That
was one of my frustrations with somebody in chat who said, oh, well, this doesn't include Muslims, does it? And it's like, no. Arguably, the creator God of the universe would actually encapsulate almost every conception of God, arguably even possibly pagan conceptions of God. Because effectively, even within pagan pantheons, even within like the Greco-Roman pantheon, there is still like a creative firmament underneath reality that birthed all of the titans and the gods. So there's still like, there's still the conception of like a fundamental ordered and creative force in the universe, even in a pagan religious sense.
I struggle with this question. It's a very, very tough one, and I don't know that I have a good canned answer. I think the answer to that would be, it depends on how well those beliefs are compatible with the rest of the values espoused, right? Because if you look at like strict like Sharia law Islamism, right? Like, yes, they claim the existence of a creator, but the values are incompatible, right? So, like, I get
that.
I think I don't know that I have a canned answer, but certainly they were trying to include the people's religions who were here, which would be the Christians, the Jews, and the deists, and that certainly I would hope it expands to cover people who have other beliefs, so long as those are compatible with American values. If that makes sense. Yeah.
It does make sense. I think there's arguments from Muslims, for instance, like in reference to like the niqab, right? Like the religious dress that the women are compelled to wear sometimes in certain hyper-conservative households. They argue that it is a liberty to wear the niqab because through religious choice, it frees you from the sexual predation of the male gaze. And so there's some interesting arguments actually about how what we view as like stultifying, authoritarian, social conservatism that forces people into discrete boxes within Islam. There's actually some interesting philosophical arguments about how they could be argued to be more liberating than tyrannical. But so I actually want to get to, because it was mentioned in the first paragraph, and arguably, I think you'll agree with this, that the propositions that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that effectively what they're doing is and I think we could probably talk about this for 20 minutes, but I'm actually looking for a yes or no, that they are predicating these inalienable rights on the existence and wisdom of a creative force in the universe that has made an objective morality that is discernible. So do you think that assessment is correct?
Yeah, I think that assessment's correct. I think that there are ways that you could get to natural law based off of like evolutionary theory or like even mimetic theory, but that's not what they were doing. They were doing it on the basis of a creator expressly. And that's how I do it, by the way. But I don't think that if you're an atheist, you have to say no to this because of that. But that's not what they were doing.
Then I want to tell you how I got to deism, and then I would actually love to hear how you got to deism. So I was raised very Christian, very conservative. I went to church every weekend for 18 years. I feel like I understand Christianity pretty well. But there were propositions in there like Jesus Christ being the Messiah. Sorry, Republican in exile, before I blaspheme or go heretical. But I'm going to go heretical real quick. Like the nature of the resurrection, Christ's relationship with God as an incarnation of God. There were the historical issues, there were moral prescription issues, there were scriptural issues, there was the contradictions between the spirit of the Old Testament and the spirit of the New Testament that just bugged me, and I wasn't able to reconcile. And so as a result, eventually I kind of landed on the fact that I was like, well, I don't really know what I believe, but I know that I don't believe this literally. I don't believe that, Moses went into the Red Sea and just like raised up his hands, and through the power of God, just like the ocean fucking, just like 40-foot tall waves just separated and thousands of people were able to walk through the Red Sea. What's more likely, in my opinion, is just that like, they were being chased by Pharaoh's guards. They were in a battle. They set fire to the crops behind them. A cool fire tornado blocked Pharaoh's troops from re-enslaving the Jews. And then they found a path through the Reed Sea, arguably like the Nile itself, where basically they found a land bridge through it. But through time and the telephone game of history, because this allegedly happened 3,200 years ago, the story just became more and more intense over the years, as humans are wont to do, particularly when they're not held accountable to facts. That seemed more logical to me and more possible. So, but what ended up happening was, and I remember this moment quite vividly, is I was at a wedding, and it was a dry wedding with a Southern Baptist Christian family. And I was being a miserable prick because I had just broken up with my girlfriend. I wanted to get drunk. Like, I wanted to find a girl to flirt with. I wanted to do this. I wanted to do that. And I was being like a selfish, hedonistic, nihilist prick. And then the service starts. And I'm kind of like, I'm a miserable prick, but these people all seem so happy. And if I don't take the scripture literally, but if I look at what's happening right now, what is really happening right now? And what's really happening is a man is going up with a woman, and they want to have children, and they are going into a contract with each other for the rest of their lives in order to take care of each other in sickness and health, till death do they part, for better or for worse. They're going to care for each other. They're going to love each other. And who's around us right now? the entire community are witness to this contract in order to try to reinforce this social bond. And who do they keep referencing through the marriage ceremony? They keep referencing God. And so what they're trying to do, regardless of whether or not you're a literalist Christian or a literalist religious person, is they're trying to say the creative and ordered force of humanity made us. That is good. We come together to have kids. That is good. We are going to take care of each other for the next few decades till one of us dies. That is good. And we want our community to celebrate with us that we are engaged in this pair bonding, raising children, instructing them on morality, and being, hopefully, ideally, raising pro-social children. And I was like, all of this is amazing. Like, all of this is incredible. All of this is incredibly, like, reinforcing of a healthy, happy society. And then look at the anti-theist cunts, including the people that are in my chat right now, that some of them never want to get married, never want to be pair bonded, never want to have children, only want to engage in nihilistic and hedonistic sex, only want to engage in drug consumption. Some of them, no offense, guys, do parasocially love you, and some of you are beautiful and wonderful people. But some of them are miserable, angry, rude, aggressive, antisocial. And so it's like, well, if we followed this from an evolutionary psychological analysis and we put into two pots all of the misanthropic, drug-addicted, nihilistic, childless sex freaks into one pot, and then if we put all the pro-social, religious, attempting to be moral but failing religious people into another pot, whose society is going to be better off a century from now? And it seems quite clear to me that the people who are grappling with religious problems, spiritual problems, trying to live moral lives, trying to be loyal to their partner, trying to raise children, trying to do this, trying to do that, even if you don't believe it on a literal basis, on an evolutionary psychological basis, there are so many clear advantages to the religious, conservative, social style that it almost seems naturally evident that you would want to reinforce this side of the pot rather than this side of the pot. Because if we go to the extremes on this side, basically humanity is going to be burnt out in 2 or 3 generations. It's just going to die. It's going to wither and no longer exist. Whereas if you go to this side, are they going to be wrong about material reality? Are there going to be some, I promise I'll wrap in a second, but are they going to be wrong about some aspects of material reality? Absolutely. Are they going to believe some silly things about spirituality and God and religion? Absolutely. But are they going to have a pro-social, pro-natal, propagating, ideally striving to be moral society? And the answer is yes. So, I mean, that seemed like enough evidence for me to consider religious conception seriously.
Yeah, I agree, by the way, that like I think that there's a lot of proof in the pudding. And oddly, you can say that like religion is an evolutionarily adaptive trait, and that's an argument you could make in favor of evolution. It's actually a little bit sticky because a lot of religion has celibate priests, and that's not good for gene replication. So you'd have to take like group gene theory, which is actually,
that's because priests were treated like rock stars in the medieval era, and they were banging the people in their flock.
So maybe
that's where that celibate,
they were getting away with it.
That celibate prohibition came from.
So I think you could take that position. I think for me, my move to deism was in many ways, I'm not going to get into the details, but it's quite simple. I've had religious experiences personally. I think the philosophical arguments for the existence of God are on net better than the arguments against. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to have a slam dunk that convinces you. I just mean that I have a philosophy degree. I spend a lot of time on religious philosophy. I spend a lot of time looking at these arguments. I think they're better than the alternatives. And my problems with religion, when I really examined it, had everything to do with my inability to verify claims of specific revelations or miracles. I can't tell if you're talking to God. There's just no way for me to know that. And there's no way for me to verify whether a miracle happened 2,000 years ago. And that was a barrier for entry for Christianity, because I just don't feel like I'm in a position to evaluate those claims in a way that would allow me to believe them. But that doesn't mean I can't believe in God, and that makes me a deist. Now, on the flip side, I'm not hostile to those claims. Like if somebody could, if somebody could convince me of the truth of Christ's resurrection through historic evidence, I would become a Christian, because I'm not, there's nothing in my belief system that presupposes that that was impossible. I'm not hostile to it. I just don't, I'm agnostic as to that specific thing. And I don't think you can be a Christian and be agnostic to that specific thing. You're muted. Conor, you're muted.
Sorry. I was saying you're very spiritually, and I am as well, doubting Thomas. So, doubting Thomas, basically like Christ gets resurrected, and this is like a scriptural thing. And everybody's like, oh yeah, he came back to life. He came back to life. And then doubting Thomas is like, fuck that. You're a bunch of lying, delusional freaks. And then Jesus shows up. And by the way, this is actually part of the reason why I don't believe, but take my cynical perspective with a grain of salt. Jesus allegedly, doubting Thomas allegedly actually touches the spear wound in Jesus Christ's ribs, and touches the stigmata, like the holes in Christ's hand from when he was nailed to the cross. And so basically doubting Thomas says, oh wow, my Lord, I can't believe I ever doubted you, now I believe. And so Christ says, well, Thomas, you are blessed because you have seen and believed, but blessed are those who have not seen and still believe. And so for me, that feels like very legalistic, very intelligent, very, in my mind, kind of like manipulative, where it's like, well, Thomas gets to go to heaven, but he was doubting your fucking ass when you were crucified, and he got to touch the stigmata. He got to fucking see your wound in your ribs. Whereas me, the motherfucker, 2,000 years later, I don't get to see this shit, and I'm going to hell because I don't literally believe. That feels unfair as fuck. That's where, for me, once again, I have a doubting Thomas mentality of, okay, you're claiming these extraordinary things happened, and that basically Jesus Christ was in our understanding of reality, like a fucking wizard who was able to use the power of God to manifest things on this planet that defy the laws of physics. Okay, like that's fine that you're making those claims, but in order for me to actually believe any of this shit, then I would need to actually see these things for myself. And also, I would be in the background, if Jesus was doing the water to wine miracle, or if he was doing any of these miracles, I'd be looking for him to have food color up his sleeves. I'd be trying to, I'd be walking around with a pair of scissors, when he was levitating, and trying to cut cables, see if I could find the cables that were helping Jesus levitate. He goes, he's walking on water, and then I go check the water tank in order to see if there's a glass pane that is invisible that I can't see. That would be me. I would be checking to make sure that the miracles weren't parlor tricks.
And I don't know that I'm even that hostile to them. I think ultimately for me, I ascribe to, and we're probably going to get into this, an epistemological system that kind of basically, it's the one that it was popular at the founding. It's called Scottish common sense realism, which basically says there's certain human experiences that just can't reasonably be doubted. It can't reasonably be doubted that we share an external world. It can't reasonably be doubted that solipsism is false and that there are other people out there with minds. It can't reasonably be doubted that we have some modicum of free will. It can't reasonably be doubted that we have a moral sense, and that we sense that things are right or wrong, and that we try to, to the extent we can, be good. These are just human qualities. They're qualities of being a human, and spending a lot of time trying to deconstruct and pick them apart is kind of pointless, because you can't live any other way, because that's who humans are. And from that foundation, arguing for a deistic God is very easy. How would we have free will? How would we have a moral sense? The answers to those questions are very clear if there is a God. They're very unclear on naturalism. So that you get to God pretty easily from there.
I appeal to naturalism because I feel like, as much as a lot of liberals and progressives are hostile to evolutionary psychology because they feel like it's all post hoc rationalizations of human behavior, or they're hostile to naturalism, so to speak, because they think that, once again, it's just like scientists doing post hoc rationalization on human behavior, and we're such like complex, fucked up creatures that like even our attempts to explain are like laughable in the face of reality. I understand that instinct, but also like I would rather attempt to understand reality, understand morality, pick at what you and I identified as like objective human, or not even objective human morality, but like objective morality, and then try to live aligned to those values as maximally as possible, and then reap the comparative benefits, right?
Yeah.
So like kindness over cruelty. That's oftentimes emphasized in like religious teachings. But you find that kindness over cruelty, even though you and I both operate in an incredibly cruel space, oftentimes when you are cruel as a matter of fact, you generate a lot of enemies. You spend a lot of time in anger. A lot of people will spend a disproportionate amount of time trying to destroy you reputationally, politically, socially, whatever. Whereas with like kindness or tact or politeness, it's very boring. I'm not saying that you're gonna be like a multi-millionaire live streamer or whatever, if you're kind or tactful, but you will gain more friends. You will have more opportunities. You'll get more employment opportunities. Also, no offense to anybody present, there are women who value kindness in their mates, and therefore they might be more likely to date you or marry you or have your children or something like that. And so it's very clear that when we talk about these virtues or vices, and of course there's times to be cruel, there's times to be mean, times to be violent, and it's righteous. But having discernment and judgment itself is a debate about virtue and morality. Because there are some people who truly say it's a waste of time to have discernment. It's a waste of time to even analyze morality. Just act off of your base animal impulses at all times and enjoy the wild ride that is biological existence. And those people normally are miserable cunts.
So here's another absolutely based Calvin Coolidge quote, based on what you just said, since we're doing the declaration. We do not need more intellectual power. We need moral power. We do not need more knowledge. We need more character. We do not need more government. We need more culture. We do not need more law. We need more religion. We do not need more of the things that are seen. We need more of the things that are unseen. If the foundation be firm, the superstructure will stand. And since we're talking about the Declaration, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about, if you read the Declaration, there is these references to nature's law, the nature's God, the capital C creator, and they're talking about a maximally broad moral framework that sustains the American project. What is the absolute moral floor, the minimum you need to believe for the American project to make sense? And the answer is, you need to believe that there is some kind of objective natural law, some kind of quality about what it means to be human that creates these unalienable rights. Now, the problem is, in modern society, progressive ideology and thought has advanced so far that it is very common for people to think that's horseshit. They flat out reject that. But the problem is, they actually had a search. They were very careful with their language, and they identified the minimum you would need for America to make sense. So when you see all these ideas that come out of the modern progressive liberal left that seem un-American, it's not surprising to me, because they reject the foundation. And if you reject the foundation, the superstructure will not stand. That's what the founders meant when they said it's a constitution for a moral people. We have to agree on this foundation.
We're based off of that belief, though, that, and I've heard you allude to this earlier in the conversation, so I'll bring it back up. If I think you and I arrived at deism based off of our experiences, and I think that I could defend this even to the most ardent anti-theist or atheist. I think I could defend deism pretty simply, because deism actually doesn't make any presuppositions about a afterlife. It doesn't make any presuppositions about a judgment at death. It doesn't make any presuppositions about miracles. It doesn't make any presuppositions about God's interactions with humanity. What it does do, I think, is it forwards the concept that there is a creative and ordered force in our plane of existence, and which is almost inarguable, because you can even describe the ordered forces that allow us to have this conversation, like very clearly gravity, biology, thermodynamics, fucking the concept of an atmosphere. There are so many scientifically verifiable ordered forces that allow you and I to even have this conversation, that it almost feels like you can drag, even scientifically, you can just drag up all of these laws and rules based off of our physical reality and say, clearly, based off of what we understand order to be, there is some degree of order to our plane of existence. And there is some kind of force that, even if creation is not the way that you want to describe it, if you want to describe it as like emanation or spontaneous existence, there's something that kicked this plane of existence off chronologically in the way that we understand time. And there are ordered rules about existence that you can follow. And oftentimes when you deny things like gravity or thermodynamics, it means you're deaf. Like if you as a biological being tried to deny these systems, you actually fucking die. So anyways, the point of that is that I think that you and I arrived at that. What you alluded to, I think, though, which I think is you trying to make it possible for atheists and anti-theists to be American, is you said that you could still arrive at the conceptions of natural law even if you don't believe in a creator God.
I think it's philosophically very difficult, and I'm not entirely sure it's sound. Like, I actually don't know if it. I on my stream, and if people are interested in, given that it's your
I feel
chat,
like you're trying to carve out like a little,
a
concession to those kinds of people.
One of the projects I've been working on is developing frameworks and arguments that will make natural law appealing to non-believers. So I've actually been spending some time trying to develop these arguments. I'm not 100% sure they work, to be candid with you. I'm not sure, but I do think that the way I look at it is, because we're a propositional nation and we were founded on a proposition, it's this particular proposition. It's not a random proposition. It's this one. It's carved in time. We need to find ways to get people to buy into the proposition and say it with a full chest and a full heart, that they're proud of this. They're proud of this proposition. And people are rejecting it because they're being taught to think in postmodern and post-structural and atheistic ways. And I think those of us who want to preserve and restore the American ideal, which, by the way, created the most free, prosperous, and wealthy society in human history. So, and the other ideals produced Mao, Stalin, Hitler. So, we can talk about the track record of each ideal, and I think we're doing pretty good. I think that we need to be in the business of restoring this through advocacy. We need to be talking about these ideals. We need to be making them accessible, and not like complex philosophical ideas. Do you want the government to get to tell you how to live and how to think? Or do you want the liberty to pursue happiness? Do you want the government to decide what job you have, or where you should live, or who you should marry, or in the case of Woodrow Wilson, whether you should be sterilized? Like, do you actually want the government to have that power over you? Or do you believe that you're entitled to self-determination, to some liberty, right? Like, I think that we need to be at that bedrock level where we're asking, like, do you really think, if the government decided tomorrow that you were less than equal, if the government said, you know what, fuck it, we are discriminating against X, Y, and Z person, we're going to say that you are inhuman under the law, that they could do it, that because they decided it would be so? Or do you think that there's some moral proposition that is above the government, that the government measures itself against, unalienable natural rights? And these are unintuitive ideas. These are deeply intuitive ideas, and they've just been eroded by this constant yammering about my truth and moral subjectivity, and we all make it up as we go. And unfortunately for those people, I guess, America is founded on these principles. And if you changed these principles to something else, it would just cease to be America. That's what America is on a fundamental level.
So let's break that down then, because I am once again, for the purpose of disassembly and reassembly, not for the purpose of annihilation. I want to. There's a claim that the creative and ordered force of the universe has endowed living beings, but humanity specifically, man, that we are created equal, and that we're given certain inalienable rights by this conception. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I actually want to start with the equality of humans, because what's interesting about this is obviously you get some good things out of the claim of the equality of humans. For instance, like the emancipation of black slaves almost seems like predestined by this statement.
And can I just clarify one point? Because I agree with what you just said. It's equal moral worth or equal moral dignity, not like literal equality. I am not as tall as LeBron James.
That was exactly what I was gonna. That's exactly where I was going. So can you allow me to forward the unequal argument, and then you can respond with the moral equality and why?
Sure.
So for instance, like my instinct when I hear all men are created equal, I'm gonna laugh. I'm gonna be a dick. I think about Admiral Gibbs. Okay, I'm not kidding. I'm being very mean. I think this man is a fucking orangutan.
We got to circle back to your rage quit at the end just for memes. I didn't bring it up earlier, but we got to circle back to it for the memes.
Dude, I think the man is an orangutan. I think he has fucking 90 IQ. Either that or he has like 150 IQ and he's just trolling the fuck out of everybody. That's also possible. So at maximum he has 150 IQ and he's trolling people by pretending he has a 90 IQ. I suspect that he has a 90 IQ. I don't think he has fucking principles. I don't think he adheres to anything. I think he literally shows up and just fucking throws shit at the wall and sees what sticks along his tribalist political argument. If I could denaturalize him and catapult him into the Caribbean alongside Hassan Piker, I fucking would. Okay,
but you were pretty drunk though, right? Like
I was stoned.
You were stoned. Yeah, because when you showed up, you started speaking, and I was like, Conor is lit the fuck up. I didn't know with what.
Well, I told Tom. I told Tom before the debate. I was like, because okay, so hold on. We'll do this now just so I can explain it.
Just for the memes.
So Tom told me, he's like, hey, he told me this like 6 months ago. He's like, hey man, panel scene's kind of dead. You know, like Wick and Prime are doing what they can, but I want to try to start the panel scene again. Can you hang out on Fridays? And I was like, unfortunately, no, wife's work schedule. I wasn't able, I'm not able to commit to Fridays. So sorry about it. Let's check back in a few months and see if my schedule's a little bit better. So my wife wasn't working Friday, but they were also doing a family event. So I had the night to myself. So since I had the night to myself, I was like, I'm going to get fucking drunk or stoned or whatever. I'm going to have a good night. I'm going to chill. And so Tom hits me up and he's like, hey, I'm doing a panel show. Are you available this Friday? And I was like, kind of, right? Kind of. Who do you have? Because obviously if he's getting like, I don't know, fucking Ro Khanna or Thomas Massey or fucking Vosh or Destiny or something, I'm going to show up, right? Or Andrew Wilson even. I'm going to show up. I probably wouldn't have gotten stoned. But he said, oh, well, right now I only have Admiral Gibbs confirmed. And I was like, okay, number one, I'm going to need more players because Admiral Gibbs and I are oil and water. Number two, I'm probably, especially if it's just Admiral Gibbs and or a few other Twitch and YouTube political shitters. No offense, I love you, but we are collectively Twitch and YouTube political shitters. I'm not showing up sober. And so I told Tom that fucking beforehand. All right. So Gibbs does the 1988 fucking Karg Island argument. And I'm like, fuck this. Like, number one, I'm going to have a heart attack. Like, I will die on this stream if I have to argue with Admiral Gibbs about Donald Trump writing the 1988 op-ed about fucking Karg Island. Number two, this is going to ruin my high. I'm out. And so I dipped the fuck out. And I told Tom, I told Tom beforehand, so That's my excuse. That's my excuse.
In fairness, I was surprised you were showing up on the anti-conflict side of the debate, and like, I don't know if you watched how that turned out. I fucking annihilated that Jola dude. Like, it was fucking bad. So I would hope that if you were showing up sober, it would have been a more interesting debate. But I suspect that if you were showing up fucked up, it might have been might have turned into blood pretty fast.
I'm a neoconservative. I would love to have a free Iran. I would love for the pro-democratic revolution to overthrow the Ayatollahs. I would love for American energy dominance in the Middle East and North Africa. However, I think that without the consent of Congress, without an authorization for use of military force, with this military operation being so complex, and the deleterious effects that we are experiencing economically and geopolitically right now, it's a poorly executed, fucked up military operation. But honestly, we could spend 2 hours on that. So
if you guys want to see me and Conor debate that, you got to fucking pay us because we're talking about something else. So if you want
like the stream, share it with your friends, engage with chat, super chats if you got them, memberships if you got them. True.
If you are trying to get me and Conor to debate geopolitics, there was a moment. Conor wasn't the right time. Yeah, fucking pay us. But back to the declaration. So you were saying, I think you were making the pitch that like all men are created equal should be interpreted literally, and that's just false.
Well, I mean, that's literally until you said morally. I was interpreting it textually, literally, I suppose. And then I was going to bring up the fact that, like, obviously there's people with mental disabilities and physical disabilities, and there's this and there's that. So if you add on the word all men are created equal, if you believe the intent of the text was to communicate the fact that all men are created of equal moral worth, right? Then that's the conception that's trying to be conveyed. I'll accept that. But I do want to ask you, why are men created of all equal worth? Because obviously throughout history, we've had different societies that participated in femicide, right? Mm-hmm. They valued males more than they valued females. We've had societies that didn't value the disabled, so they would commit infanticide and let their children die of exposure. There were societies that believed that like twins were like witchcraft, and therefore, to keep twins in your society was actually a curse from the gods. And so they would kill these children out of fear of dark magic. So I guess my question is, why is it self-evident that humans, regardless of gender, sex, physical ability, etc., are of equal moral worth?
So if you take the axioms that we've taken as axiomatic, the things that are self-evident, the obvious answer is because we're created in God's image. Right? So that if everyone is created in God's image, then they all have moral worth as someone who is created in God's image. And this is the concept where, like, why do we have equality before the law? Like, why does that matter? Why does it matter that everyone gets due process? Why does it matter that everyone has freedom of speech? Why does it matter that everyone has freedom of conscience and association? It's because they have equal moral worth. If they didn't have equal moral worth, then it would be fine to fucking throw Hassan Piker in jail for being a fucktard because he doesn't have moral worth. So fuck him. But if he does have moral worth, and if he is vested, with these values, that were given to him by his creator, then we have to respect that. We have a moral obligation to respect that, even if he's fucking it up. Even if he's doing the wrong thing, we shouldn't use the power of the government to constrain this. And this is, again, contrast it to Wilson and the progressives, right? Where he said, literally, we should be able to force sterilize people because they're imbeciles and they're fucking morons, and we don't want them reproducing in society. That kind of eugenic impulse is, if you don't believe that everyone's vested with equal moral worth, well, then, yeah, you say, wouldn't society be better if we got rid of all the bad genes? Eugenics. Let's kill all the dumb people and stop them from reproducing. Now, that from a utilitarian worldview, that actually makes some sense. If you're a utilitarian with a 1,000-year time horizon, why not do eugenics? But if you believe in natural law, if you believe that people really are vested with equal moral worth, that's morally abhorrent. It's evil. and you wouldn't consider it even if it produced a better outcome. And that's a fundamentally different worldview.
It is but I think the reason why, because I do try to evaluate whether or not I believe things are true, not whether or not really smart people said this thing 250 years ago. So I think that in order for me to sign off on this, I'm effectively appealing to consequence. And the way that I would appeal to consequence is that, like, when it comes to eugenics, just as an example, like Down syndrome people.
Mhm.
With Down syndrome people, if you like pull them on like life satisfaction, happiness, all that kind of stuff, and even the families of Down syndrome people, they oftentimes pull very high. And I know I'm appealing to utility right now, but they oftentimes pull very high. Whereas if you had purely a eugenic analysis of utility, then you would just wipe out the entire Down syndrome population of humanity. And the second that CRISPR became available, you basically gene edit Down syndrome out of humanity. Same thing with other genetic diseases, et cetera, et cetera. But I would appeal to consequence. So, for instance, like you said, well, Hassan Piker and Admiral Gibbs, we have to believe that they have moral worth or equal moral worth as humans. That way we treat them correctly within society, because it's only a matter of time. Once we start making these distinctions of who has moral worth and who doesn't, it's kind of only a matter of time before we start identifying groups that don't have moral worth, that you don't like argumentatively from a moral standpoint. And so there's a consequence here that once you open up Pandora's box of the non-equal moral worth of humanity, you just start chopping off branches of humanity eventually until you chop off something that's probably necessary or good.
It's no surprise that Wilson admired the society that went on to the Holocaust, because
Sure.
Wilson believed that a board of experts should determine whether you are worthy to reproduce. That a board of experts should look at you and determine whether, well, apply that logic to Nazi Germany. There were a board of experts, the Nazi Party, who then thought that there was a group of people who should stop reproducing. We should get rid of them.
No, that's an argument. That's an anti-American argument, oftentimes, ironically enough, from progressives or leftists, that the moral worth argumentation of America was applied in Germany and then taken out to its maximal logical extension.
That's a bullshit argument. That's just
well, I know. Well,
you can argue.
I found it ironic.
Right.
I found it ironic that probably like self-identified progressives of the early 20th century were the people responsible for utilitarian eugenics in America, and then that inspired Nazi Germany. But then progressives and liberals in the late 20th, early 21st century are saying, oh, well, America was responsible for this idea, therefore we're guilty and worthy of destruction. But the one thing that I want to...
That's just insanely ahistoric. Wilson was looking to Europe and admiring European society where, the experts were unimpeded by the will of the people and democracy, and unimpeded by natural rights and natural law. He was looking to Europe.
That's what... sorry, go ahead.
First of all, they're just ahistoric and wrong. But second of all, this is a constant trend in like progressive argumentation where they do something. It's incredibly fucked up, and then they rebrand it and then go, oh shit, we need more government to prevent the thing that we did last week. And you're like, wait, hold on a second. I see the game, friendo. Once you start reading history, you start going, oh shit, you just keep pulling the wool over everybody's eyes, and everyone's so fucking ahistoric that they're letting you get away with it. They can't keep getting away with it, Conor.
Well, that's why people ask me, what's the ideal society? And then oftentimes I'll be like, well, if you put me in charge, I would create a technocracy, but I'm not saying that you would have a good time. I would, my technocratic impulses are such that I would probably make a worse society. Now, it's good for me. I'm going to be doing great in my technocratic, CRISPR, utilitarian, council of elders, fucking pseudo-Republican technocracy. But there's going to be a lot of people who get sterilized. So let's not give Conor unilateral power because I probably will make a worse society. Okay, so hold on. So this is where I want to give you one thing to chew on, though, in reference to truth, I suppose.
Mhm.
So I think that the
And then I want to
conception.
poke the bear a little bit after you do that, but go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the conception of equal moral worth actually does come from Abrahamic scripture. And I think the scripture that comes to mind when I'm thinking of this is that there is, I think it's Old Testament and I think it's New Testament, funnily enough. But there's a couple of verses that effectively say, that which you do to the least amongst you, you do unto me as well. And that's supposed to be from God. And I think it's something that's repeated by Jesus in the New Testament as well. And so effectively, it's this valorization of the poor, the downtrodden, the oppressed, the weak, the infirm, et cetera, et cetera. And there's Abrahamic scriptural passages about how it's actually the moral duty of the society to take care of the least amongst us. But in where you kind of mentioned that we're going all the way down to the concept of a creator God that might even be like not pre-Abrahamic, but like more expansive than the Abrahamic God, I suppose. And so when you mentioned that, like, well, the reason why we have moral worth is because we're all created within the image of God. Even so, the Greeks, funnily enough, would agree with you, the pagan Greeks. And they actually believed that the human form was a gift from the gods, which is actually, ironically enough, why they didn't like circumcision. They thought that circumcision was a rejection of the design of the gods. But I think that from a pagan worldview, it would be possible to argue that there are better and worse images and copies of God. And therefore, the disabled, therefore, the infirm, therefore, the insane would not have equal moral worth because of the proximity to God's greatness.
But it is creator singular. It's not creators, it's not pagan gods, right? Like, and I think that there's one of the problems with paganism as a philosophic system is that it's actually radically self-defeating. Because here's the problem. Like, if you imagine, sometimes people make this philosophic argument, it's a really bad one, but they'll say, like, how do you know that God isn't evil? Well, here's how you know God. Here's how you know God isn't evil. If God were evil, then your cognitive faculties would have been designed by an evil God who's trying to trick you all the time. But your idea that God is evil came from those cognitive faculties. But now you have reason not to trust those cognitive faculties. So your idea that God is evil is radically self-defeating, because once you presuppose an evil God, you can't trust your own thoughts. Your own thoughts gave you the idea of the evil God, but you can't trust that thought either. Right? So everything you believe is now radically self-defeating. The problem.
Well, funnily enough, that's actually like a. I don't want to go down too long of a diatribe, but have you ever heard of the Gnostic conception of the pantheon,
and
where effectively we've been kidnapped? We've been kidnapped effectively by Satan onto a plane of existence that prevents us from getting to a higher plane of existence, and therefore worshiping Yahweh or whatever is effectively worshiping Satan, because what happens is we get into an existential cycle of being born on a flawed plane that is the goodness of this plane is limited because the God that has captured us within this plane of existence is trying to keep us in an existential prison.
Well, and this is why the Abrahamic conception.
That's an acid trip that I can't explore. I cannot.
Yeah, we don't need to do that now. But the Abrahamic conceptions of the omnis, omnibenevolence, omniscience, omnipotence, are so philosophically important, because if your creator, let's put an S on it, creators, were Odin and Loki, you would never know whether your ideas were coming from Odin or coming from Loki. And if your ideas come from Loki, they can't be trusted because Loki's always fucking with people and lying. So like you get into self-defeat territory very quickly. Monotheism avoids this philosophically. It's a huge advance philosophically to move to monotheism rather than paganism. This is why Plato, for example, when he was when he was coming up with his like best philosophic arguments, he was basing them on the Platonic forms rather than directly on the gods, because the gods create all these problems that philosophically monotheism solved. But regardless, you get creator, equal moral worth. Jefferson was very clear, by the way, that he meant equal moral worth, not equal abilities, in his writings and about the
yeah. I mean, during the 19th century, I think it would actually be hard to argue the equal abilities, argument, because obviously they had slavery at the time.
Yeah.
They probably had some pretty harsh attitudes towards disabled people. They probably had some pretty harsh nationalistic attitudes. So I would just take it on your face value that they're trying to argue moral worth, not physical ability,
or just think about the fact that this is being signed by Jefferson and Hamilton and Franklin and Paine, right? These are men who, if you put yourself in their shoes, you imagine their day-to-day experience outside of the company of the people who signed that document with them. They probably never met their equal. Like if Jefferson's walking around town, he's 100 IQ points smarter than the second smartest person he meets, right? I mean, like he is not the equal of the baker in any real sense, but they're the same moral worth. And I think that's a important point.
Weirdly enough, I could come up with like 10,000 fucking pagan, agnostic, atheistic arguments against the equal moral worth of humanity. But even in my own brain, what I would do in order to accept this, what did we call proposition? Is consequentially, and I know you probably don't like me using a consequentialist analysis lens, but consequentially, I think a society that just grants equal moral worth to each one of its citizens, regardless of ability, is still a vastly morally superior society compared to the one that is trying to figure out who we can chop out of the moral worth argument. So I'm just going to accept that, even from a consequentialist lens, even if descriptively I could come up with like anti-theist or pagan arguments for why it's not true.
And again, I know we're not going to deconstruct everything, but just to make this point, if you find that you have adopted a philosophy that is incompatible with that value, my point is not that we should deconstruct the value. We should point out that the person who's espousing a value that's incompatible with the equal moral worth of humans is actually un-American. They're holding an un-American position, right? Like, and that's part of the value of understanding what these self-evident truths are, is that then we can call balls and strikes. When somebody says something to you and they're like, hey, actually, I kind of think that the white man is superior. You're like, fuck you, that's un-American. Right? You can actually, where the lines are because you know what the philosophy is. And that's
I like what you said earlier, where if we're trying to identify good progress versus bad progress, then realizing the ideals of the Declaration of Independence is going to be good progress. Whereas realizing the utopian vision of whatever fucking utilitarian technocratic fucking sociopath has built a cult of personality around him, we can identify that as quote unquote bad progress. I think that makes pretty clear analytical lines of like, if you are an American who believes in the propositional nature of American society, then we can identify good and bad progress. Now, we're going to have to talk about life. And if you'll indulge me a second, I would like to articulate what I believe is the natural right to life. So for me, I think about like nature. Okay. So within the natural world, when a creature is born, it seems like almost every creature on the planet, if we believe in a creator God, we believe a creator God effectively either designed or through evolution or whatever made these biological systems. It seems like every creature has the capacity to not only perpetuate its own biology, but then also defend it. And so we would never begrudge a prey animal. And actually, I think weirdly enough, this is kind of where a self-defense argument is easily extrapolated. We would never begrudge a prey animal define its own slaughter. So on the Serengeti, in the grass plains of Africa, if a lion is chasing a zebra, and then a zebra kicks it in the fucking face in order to escape the lion, we would never begrudge, in my opinion, the lion attempting to eat through its natural predilections, but we would also never begrudge the zebra its defiance of its own slaughter. And so if we apply that to humanity, once you're born as a human, you're a part of a social tribe, you're a part of a family, et cetera, et cetera. It is natural and common and probably morally just for your family, your community, your society to defend your life against external threats. And then also, it is natural, moral, and just that if somebody tries to take your life unjustly, then you are capable of defending yourself. And what I like about this argumentation, and I'll shut up in a second, is that not only does it seem to appeal to the natural state of pretty much all biological beings that we're aware of in the galaxy, or the universe actually, but not just that, it actually implies a right to self-defense. So if someone is trying to take your life unjustly, including a tyrannical government, which from your argumentation has departed from the propositional nature of our project as a civilization, then you have the right to defend yourself. And I think that's inferred in the right to, or implied in the right to life. So how do you feel about my description, and what would you add to it?
I totally agree. And I think that the only things I'd add to it is that the right to life, because keep in mind at that point, most crimes were punishable by death. Like most felonies didn't have imprisonment. You were just killed for most felonies. So the right to life implied also the right to due process, because how do we determine if it's fair to take your life? We have to give you a fair process. So due process comes from the right to life. And also it contrasts to these two sentences together, philosophically contrast with the divine right of kings. Because in Europe, in the monarchical system, the king was chosen by God. It was not a government of equals. People did not have equal moral worth. The king had much more moral worth than you. And therefore, the king could just decide to kill you because you were a subject and he was the divine ruler. Now, and but if everyone has equal moral worth, then the government can't just choose to kill you. Even if everyone just gets together and votes, they're like, fuck Hassan Piker, we're executing him. You can't just execute someone because they voted for it, right? There's a limitation imposed by natural law. And you kind of see it, by the way, how they're doing this, because they're not basing it off of, like if you talk to like a Christian, they're going to base it off scriptural interpretation. They're basing it off of first principles, where they say like, it's self-evident that all men are created equal and they're endowed by they're created with certain unalienable rights. Well, if that's true, then we can't just kill them, right? Because they have equal moral worth. So why can I just kill you if you have moral worth? That doesn't make any sense.
Yes, and additionally, what I like about that, and what I would do argumentatively, which I understand is actually different than yours. So some people would say, and this is actually one of my criticisms of direct democracy. So quite famously, Athenian democracy was actually just like 51-49. Like you could vote for anything.
Direct democracy
and
sucks.
and there wasn't a limiting construction of republicanism and rule of law and common law at the time. And so effectively, people could just vote on your execution. And quite famously, I always forget the relationship between Plato and Socrates. I forget who writes shit down and who actually did the original dialogues and didn't like to write shit down. I think it was, I always fuck it up.
Plato's the writer. Socrates is arguably a fictitious character invented by Plato, but also could have been a real person. I'm not sure. I don't want to take a position on that.
So Socrates arguably was quite famous. Wait, was it Plato or was it Socrates? But I'm pretty sure it was Socrates who was quite famously put to death by an assembly of the Greeks because he had like corrupted the youth or whatever, and he was compelled by the state to drink hemlock.
Yeah.
And so that's like an example where you have one of the most brilliant minds in Greece who is compelled by the democracy to kill himself because he was too controversial. He was too spicy. And that's where for me, a lot of people, they try to just like say the word democracy like it's a magic fucking wand in order to say, but I'm fighting for the good thing. And I'm like, no. Like democracy, like many
Mhm.
political ideologies, is a tool. It can be used in order to get additional consent of the governed, to have the governed, make their voices heard within a system in order to implement it, the ideology. But just because the 51% of a population is voting for something does not make the thing that they're voting for inherently good. And we should evaluate, and no offense to the vulgar masses, but the vulgar masses are oftentimes persuadable by sophists and demagogues and tyrants, who charismatic tyrants. And so we can't just say democracy in and of itself is a good.
Well,
It is something that is capable of good.
and Conor, can I give you the textual support for that? If you go back
Sure.
to the Declaration, which we were looking at, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these, not limited, among these, are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. The purpose of having a government is to secure their natural rights, comma, deriving just powers from the consent of the governed. So what we have is a structure. What is the purpose of the government? To secure natural rights. How are we going to do it? Democracy, right?
Now,
democracy is the tool by which they are supposed to secure natural rights. And this is why, if you think about like the First Amendment, what does the First Amendment do? It takes rights out of the democratic process. Because what the founders were saying is, we don't give a shit how big your majority is. We don't care if you have 51% of the people. Taking away freedom of conscience is contrary to natural law. You don't get to do that, right? So we have undemocratic aspects in our democracy to preserve the purpose of the government, which is to secure natural rights.
This is why I wish every political debate, I know people are like, I don't like Ryan's take on this. I think this is inconsistent, blah, 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 blah. I wish every fucking political debate was like this, because effectively what we're doing is we're teasing apart decades old, centuries old, millennia old political conceptions. But unfortunately, I don't think that a lot of people are willing or able to go down this line of thinking. But that's where, for me, when you're like, Conor, why do you still fervently identify with the label Republican? And it's because, to me, Democratic has this, like, the word Democrat itself, but also how the party conducts itself, is it has this underlying presupposition of, if most people want this, it must be good. Whereas I think republicanism and an appeal to rule of law and an appeal to technocratic competence and representative democracy has within it, like, no, we must have people who are actually moral. I know that we don't have particularly moral representatives, or at least some of the moral representatives are consistently disappointing us as a people. But we should have people who aspire to morality, aspire to virtue, aspire to technical competence, aspire to these higher virtues. And they are the ones who craft policy that are not just good for their pockets, but are also good for the nation as a whole. That's why I still identify with the label Republican, even though I feel like republicanism, no offense to any MAGA people, but I feel like it's been corrupted. But can I ask you something
to add to that? This is why I ultimately broke right. Is that I entered this space as a self-described centrist who was dissatisfied with the left, but as a lifetime Democratic voter. And what I've come to believe, because over the last couple of years, I've spent just a lot more time mining the history and the philosophy and refining the arguments and getting into the weeds on this stuff. And what I've come to see is what you just described, which is that the modern left, and I don't mean by the Hassan Pikers. I mean,
liberals are, they don't have an immune system against this argumentation.
He's a friend, but I think I would include like the Wicks and the centrist, the center left. But what they're saying ultimately is, we want to point out a problem, something that we think you'll say is bad, and then we will offer you a solution to that problem in exchange for degrading these values long term. That's the proposition the left is offering, and I don't want it. I'm just uninterested fundamentally. And once I saw that, then it became like, they're like, well, don't you want this piece of candy? And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I'm no longer interested in your explanation of why the current problem could be better solved by you, because I understand that if I give you this power, ultimately you will use it to unwind the values I hold. And if that's the case, then I fundamentally can't trust you with power. And that's when I switched from center to right. Because once I realized I couldn't trust them with power, now I have a fundamental problem. And the move had to be to build a coalition on the right that respected my values and was forward facing with what I think are American values, because it was made totally clear to me that my values have no room on the left. There's just no space for them. And that's
which actually should be that's probably going to go into the liberty thing. But somebody said, I don't even see where you guys are arguing. Dude, shut. Let me articulate this. I know I shouldn't be engaging in the chat at all.
Do you know why people fucking hate it when you talk to me? I'll spare you the fucking.
Yeah, go for it. Go. I'll go immediately after you. Yeah,
lefties fucking hate it when people talk to me, because the left believes that they're entitled to a monopoly on reasonable thought and academic dialogue. And when I talk to people, it is obviously clear to them that I've spent time thinking about this stuff, that I'm a reasonably smart guy with good credentials, and that I'm not just making this shit up to do some partisan political play. I'm reasonable, and a reasonable person who prefers the right should not exist in their utopian worldview, because I don't have the right opinion. And it pisses them off in the way that Gibbs is oil and water with you. I piss off the left in a way that Gibbs often doesn't, because I am contrary to their preconceptions of what the world should be. I bet your chat is fucking blowing up right now with all the shit I'm saying.
There's a few people who do not like what was just said, for sure.
And they will continue to not like it because I am antithetical to their core assumptions about how the world works.
Okay, so in case you're not tracking the argumentation, because this is actually like, I know it might seem like we have been describing history, philosophy, governance, etc., and we have like 80% overlap, but you have to understand that there's a gulf between Ryan and I descriptively within a fundamental part of this, which is he's saying that you must subscribe to these propositions in order to identify yourself as American, because these are the foundational documents, the foundational philosophy that establishes our society and kind of orients us towards what is good. Okay? Then what ends up happening is we got into the proposition of all men are created equal, which is that's the basis for like the Bill of Rights. It's one of the most important conceptions, is that all men are created equal. But what ended up happening through that conversation is we realized that we had to intuit this proposition from an Abrahamic understanding of God. And therefore, I'm saying that I am not subscribing to the truth claim that all men have equal moral worth. I can actually conceptualize pagan and atheist and anti-theist argumentation that human beings are actually descriptively, factually, truthfully not of equal moral worth. And so therefore, I have to agree to the consequentialist lens that treating human beings as if they have moral worth is going to create a better society than if we start going down these like rationalist, anti-theist, anti-Abrahamic evaluations of human moral worth. And so that might seem like small to you, I guess, the listener, that I agree. I agree in prescription, but not description. But you understand that within that argumentation, Ryan is saying, I am actually fundamentally anti-American because I do not agree with this proposition as a truth claim. Well, so once again, like if you didn't track that conversation, that's fine. but that is like there is a argumentative philosophical gulf between us right now,
and
which is interesting.
It explains our prior disagreements also pretty reasonably, right?
Sure.
Because the flip side of equal moral worth, by the way, is equal moral responsibility. Like in our last conversation, you were talking about some people are so stupid we should save them from themselves because of how fucking retarded they are, and I gave you a hard time about that. And we had some fun. I made some good clips out of it, but the fundamental disagreement there is that if people have equal moral worth, then the flip side of that is that they have equal responsibility and that they should be responsible for their own lives. Whereas if you're open to the idea that they don't have equal moral worth, maybe they shouldn't have equal responsibility. Maybe there should be a nanny state. Maybe there should, right? So like, this is not a small difference of opinion. Like when you play this out in normative politics, I'm going to be overtly hostile to like welfare systems in a way that Conor might not be, because I actually think people are responsible for themselves because they have equal moral worth. Like that's my basis for ascribing responsibility to them, even though I know they don't have equal capacity. And that like, so there is a big downstream distinction from these differences. And I guess, Conor, the reason I'm pushing this, like, what is American, what is not American thing, and the reason I accused you of a progressive mindset last time, is that that's kind of what the progressive mindset ultimately is saying, yeah, they said these things are self-evident, but aren't I entitled to have like a different view on these things? Aren't I entitled to make a new, to progress beyond it, right? And that's the progressive mindset.
Your delineation of good progress and bad progress makes it so I'm still going to fight you, because I actually truly do think that, based off of reality, because my loyalty to the truth, or what I perceive as the truth, is greater than my loyalty to any other conception, including the American project, even though I love the American project. I'm an American patriot. Like I love this fucking country. I love what it's created. I love what it's given its people. I love what it's given me. But my loyalty to the truth as I perceive it is greater than my loyalty even to America. And so there's going to be times like this where we are going to fight because we actually disagree on whether or not you can be, I don't want to say a patriot. I don't think that you would like doubt my love for the people of this country or doubt my love for the society that it's constructed. But I think you could quite reasonably criticize my lack of adherence to the proposition in the foundations of our nation as like, well, this is a big fucking deal, because you're going to be inferring a lot of policy prescriptions based off of the understandings of these words, and we are not the same ideologically.
But also just, you can see it playing out in real time. I'll also take it away from you to make it less charged. But like when Destiny's talking about having a truth and reconciliation committee for Republicans that bypasses due process, right? Like that's
fucking it's totally psychotic.
But why is that palatable to Destiny? Because he doesn't.
Because they're not of equal moral worth.
They're not of equal moral worth. And how does he know they're not of equal moral worth? Because they disagree with him. You see, right. And the problem is, even from a consequentialist lens, that has no limiting principle. It has no limiting principle at all. Whoever disagrees with you has less moral worth. They can be fucking Nuremberg trialed. They can be sterilized. And we know that this is not hyperbole, because Woodrow Wilson fucking did it. Because Germany fucking did it. We know what happens when these moral principles are abandoned, and it's disastrous.
And by the way, I would use a substantial amount of evidence in order to describe why I think certain people are less deserving of moral worth, but I would never, and I want to emphasize, never abandon due process, rule of law, civil right. I would never abandon any of that.
Why not?
Which is inferred based off of the conception of equal moral worth. So even if I don't think that it's literally true that every human being has equal moral worth, I do believe that society is infinitely better off if we do make an Abrahamic inference that human beings have equal moral worth.
Well, and so then I'm going to pull the Jordan Peterson jiu-jitsu on you then and say, when people say,
if you act like as if you believe it, like you believe it to be true.
When someone when someone says something is self-evidently true and is not worth unpacking, and then your response is, we are all better off if we just move forward assuming this is true and not unpacking it, it kind of seems like you agree with me that we ought.
I know that that's
that
very upsetting. It's very upsetting to. I mean, it is funny, and I like it, but it is very upsetting to obviously like anti-theists and atheists when you're like, oh well, let's walk down all of these Christian principles and see which ones you adhere to and believe, and then like a rabid anti-theist who like hates Christianity with all their guts realizes that they're abiding by like 90% of Christian principle.
Yeah.
Like it's, and then Jordan Peterson's like, well, it sounds like you kind of believe it. And they're like, no, fuck you. It's like, it's
well,
pretty
funny. And this was to kind of put the academic lens on it. Scottish common sense realism, that was the core epistemology of the system, and this was what the founders subscribed to. This came over, and this is what the dominant philosophy was at the founding. And the core belief there is it is silly to spend your philosophic energy doubting and deconstructing things that you cannot possibly reasonably doubt, and you're always going to live by. It's silly to spend your time being like, well, do they really have equal moral worth? But also, I agree that they all do have equal moral worth, and we should live that way. Like what's the point? Like, do we really want to deconstruct that people have a right to life? Is that the sort of thing that we want to pick at that scab? You know,
well, right. So hold on. So for instance, though, but then I think weirdly enough, with the right to life, you actually abolish capital punishment, and I actually do believe in capital punishment. So this is interesting, but then I want to ask you a limitation on the right to life. So excuse me, for instance, like a serial killer, like somebody who is raised up, decapitates fucking kittens, sociopath, whatever, and then they develop as a hobby as an adult, like raping and killing like women or children or whatever. Now, I don't think that person could have been born that way, could have been a genetic issue, psychological issue, whatever. But at the end of the day, I do assign some level of moral agency to human beings and the choices that they make. Therefore, based off of a evaluation of their life, I do think that the state has the right to take their life. And if we were in a scenario where, let's say, there was like an 8-year-old child who had never committed a crime, had like a good aptitude, et cetera, and there was some kind of like trolley scenario where I had the choice between saving the serial killer and saving the innocent child. I think that logically you could make the statement that based off of an evaluation of the way that they live their lives, the innocent child who has not committed a crime, who has a decent aptitude, has more moral worth than the serial killer. Therefore, in this hypothetical trolley scenario, it's not a 50-50 coin flip for me. I'm actually going to consciously pull the lever in order to hit the serial killer with a train. And so that's where, for me, though, the way that I establish the moral worth of life is through due process. And so that's where we're starting with the basis of maybe there's factors of which I am unaware that explain this person's antisocial, negative, criminal, sociopathic, murderous behavior that I should be aware of before rendering judgment. But once we exhaust the due process, we can make value judgments about the moral worth of life. And so that's where, for me, once again, from a consequentialist lens, I'm going to start with human beings all human beings are endowed with moral worth. But by the end of a due process system, I might be very comfortable saying, no, this person is worthy of going free. This person is worthy of being executed by the state based off of their moral worth.
So I think one thing that's really, really important to clarify, because it's absolutely missing from the current like progressive leftist status quo, they always think of rights in isolation. I have a right. I have a right. I have a right. I have a right. Me. Our founders believed in what was called ordered liberty. And ordered liberty meant that rights always had a corresponding duty. You have equal moral worth means also you have equal moral responsibility. So if you're a serial killer, we can kill you. How do we know you're a serial killer? Due process, right? Because you have a right to life, but you also have responsibilities. You have moral responsibilities that are inherent to you being of equal moral worth. It's not just rights, it's corresponding duties. And the other thing I would add is, because I talked with Fabian Liberty about this a few times, the big difference between our founders and like an ANCAP or like a libertarian, like that kind of a deal, is like if you talk to someone like Fabian Liberty, he believes in natural rights, but he thinks natural rights can never be infringed by the government to any extent ever for any reason. Our founders,
Right, which is kind of fucking crazy, right? Like
it's
it's kind of nutty to me.
And what our founders believed was actually more akin to a value maximization problem. Like we have these natural rights. The government is here to secure them, and the government should do everything it can to maximize these rights. Right? It should infringe as little as possible. It should always have the goal of less infringement, but it's not zero infringement, because zero infringement means you should have no state. Then you never get infringed upon, right? And
Well,
if you believe in no infringement, you're an ANCAP, and that's how you get to that belief system.
Well, and I want to keep this. I think we started at approximately 10, maybe 10:10. It's currently 12:30, and I like to keep these things around 2 hours so they're listenable as a VOD.
Yeah, makes
But
sense.
I want to ask you an important question, because we still have a liberty in the pursuit of happiness. We kind of address life, but there's a limitation to the right to life that I want to ask you about, because I actually think it's almost like core to technocratic policy decisions, particularly in the modern era. So you have asserted previously that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, are written as negative rights, effectively like limitations on the government in order to. Sorry, I have like a pain in my head. Ugh, that's horrible. But a negative right, effectively, that it's a prohibition against the government in order to impede on human beings, and that's how we've written the Constitution.
Yeah.
But how are you limiting the right to life when it comes to, let's say, universal medicine? Because people could say, like, well, it's the social responsibility. Did I have a stroke, or do I have a muscle spasm in my skull? I'm trying to figure it out.
I'm hoping it's not a stroke. That'd be a bummer.
Me-
It would be
me
great
too.
content, but you know,
I told people that I was going to die on stream. I hope I don't make that true today. So, anyways, the point is that within the right to life, so we agree that there's a collective responsibility and an individual responsibility or right to defend your life. Why is universal healthcare prohibited by your framework? Because I feel like you said that, like, the past century of government overreach is prohibited by your framework.
it wouldn't be prohibited by the right to life. But just to back up a second to make this more clear, if these rights come from God, not the government, if they come from natural law, not the government, if they come from human nature, not the government, if they precede the government, they can't be things the government is giving you, because they exist whether the government exists or not. Right? Natural law exists even if there's no government. The government exists to secure natural rights. So if they precede the government, it can't be that the rights are things the government is giving you. They're things that exist whether or not there's a government. Right? So
if
the right to
if a
life
government is established, sorry, go ahead.
So the right to life is not the right for someone else to sustain you. Right? It's not the right for someone to give you food. It's not the right for someone to give you medicine. The right to life is the right that it's your life. If you were on a desert island alone, you would have the right to life. With no one around to give you shit, you would still have your right to life. It's a moral proposition, not a demand that people give you bread.
But the legalistic. So there is a sentence that might be here, though, that basically says, like, what is it? Like, governments of, by, and for the people are established in order to execute these principles or ideas or whatever. So why can't a progressive, even if they don't believe in the propositional nature or your limitations on the expansions of the state, why can't they do that?
Okay.
So, like why can't they establish state-run social systems that, like, help out people with food and water?
They certainly can and do, as a matter of like factual reality. The argument there is not right to life. The question there is about infringement on liberty and pursuit of happiness, which is about like how much taxation and control and size and scope does the government have? How much control does government have over society? How much are they changing what you can and cannot do? So the question there is the government infringing on your liberty interests and your ability to pursue happiness, your property right interests in a way that is, infringing, I don't know, in an unconscionable way that's getting to your unalienable rights. That would be the question there. And when people who argue against like a welfare state from the Declaration of Independence, that's the argument they're making. They're saying that the government should be smaller, the government should infringe on liberty less, the government should infringe on pursuit of happiness less, infringe on property rights less, because it should be trying to maximize natural rights. Natural rights are maximized when we have liberty, and the thing that you're trying to maximize, which is social welfare, is not a natural right. So it's not it's not part of the value maximization equation.
Then, but since we're at 2 hours, and I think I might have just had a stroke.
Don't die.
It's probably a muscle spasm in my skull. I've had neck problems for a really long time, but I've been working on my neck problems with massage and stretching and all that kind of stuff. And it's gotten substantially better over time, but sometimes something will adjust in my neck, and it will be as painful as my original neck injury was. It will be inversely painful, but then the new position that my body is in feels so much better that it's like healing from a spinal injury is fucking wild.
Also, man, streaming is brutal for stuff like that. Like I have a touch of sciatica. It got so much worse after I started streaming in my free time. Like streaming is brutal on like joints.
You gotta stretch. You gotta do yoga. You gotta lift weights. Otherwise, it'll slowly kill you. But anyways, let me put a little bow on it, since I don't think I'm actually dying today. I think. So let's put a pin in it. Just so we're at approximately 2 hours. I do think that interestingly enough, I feel like it was weird to me that we fought so aggressively last time, because I didn't think that we had a big gulf, but I think in this conversation, we successfully identified the gulf. And also I think that we got through maybe like 60%, 50% of the propositions that we're going through. And so what I want to do next time, whenever you're available, is I want to talk about liberty and the pursuit of happiness and how we perceive those from a natural rights perspective. But then I want to get into the conception of like the governments are instituted by their people with the consent of the governed in order to pursue these inalienable rights. And then I want to talk about the balance between life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because I think that's actually where we are going to have a disagreement, because effectively I'm going to say, well, I feel like you're emphasizing liberty and the pursuit of happiness too hard. And you're going to say, well, you're taking this paternalistic life emphasis that is predicated on the fact that you do not think that human beings are morally equal, and the fact that therefore they do not have equal moral responsibility. Therefore, you don't believe in a third of the Declaration of Independence and or the Constitution that's inferred based off of the Declaration of Independence. Therefore, you're an un-American communist piece of shit. So like that's where I think we're going. But it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun.
It'll be fun, and I think that like these are important conversations to have, because like ultimately, what the progressives did to like, because if you came out and you tried to sell the Declaration of Independence, that shit's nonsense. I think my ideas are better. People would have told you to fuck yourself. So how did they sell it? They redefined life. They redefined liberty. They turned negative rights into positive rights. They redefined the terms and then resold it on that basis, right? And I ultimately, and where we've been driving, and it might take a few conversations to get there, is that me making peace with the modern right and making peace with like Trump and MAGA and all those things was basically the following realization. All the stuff I've said about progressivism and the Declaration and all these beliefs that I sincerely hold, and then the shocking realization that Trump, for all the things I hate about him, and there are so many things I hate about him. We could do a stream just on things I hate about Trump, and we would disagree.
That might be necessary.
And you
might need to do a Trump bad you need to get a cat of 9 tails, and you need to whip yourself on the back like every 10 seconds. That might be necessary.
They can go back. When I entered the space, I had conversations with Pisco, and that's all I fucking did. So they can go watch my old conversations. But was my shocking realization that for all the things I hate about him, he's the only leader in my lifetime who has actually made progress in eroding progressive progress. He's actually rolled back some of their victories, and that's interesting. It's hard for me to square that circle because I don't think he's the guy who should have done it. But at the same time, he's the only one that did, and I'm trying to figure that out because that's an interesting data point.
No, it is, and my stroke is subsiding, so I won't. I'd like to share like an insight on that. So what is interesting about that is you are not the first person who has forwarded to me that effectively the establishment of the welfare state and the progressive tax structure in the early 20th century is a departure from the Constitution of the United States. You are not the first person to forward that to me. So, in my opinion, I want to find out the ideological limitation that we surpassed at that time.
Yeah,
so, but I don't want to do that now because it would probably take 2 hours to unpack it.
Yeah, well, so we'll have to do liberty in pursuit of happiness, and property rights are inherent in pursuit of happiness, and that's how I'm gonna answer the question. But we can save that for next time.
Okay, cool. Well, I know that my chat is pretty hostile to you, but do you want to shill yourself out?
Yeah.
That way, if there's any conservatarians who find you based, they can find you relatively easily.
Ryan Mullally. I have my branding on the screen. You can find me on YouTube and X. Natural Law with Ryan Mullally. I'm a lawyer and a former teacher. I've litigated at every level of the U.S. court system, up to and including the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm a natural law enthusiast and enjoyer of American history and American philosophy. And you can come by and disagree with me all you want. I think you will find that I have not come to these positions lightly. These are things that I've given some substantial thought to, and that if you walk through the founding documents, you'll find that I'm not looking at them for the first time. These are ideas that I've been developing for quite some time, and I have some things to share, and you can tell me why you disagree. So I'm sure Conor's chat is full of people who love me, and they're just so excited I came by. They just love that I'm fighting the good American fight, and they are so grateful that I've dispelled them of their horrific un-American progressivism. So you're very welcome. And Conor, it's always a pleasure. I should talk to you soon.
Yeah, I had a blast. So you have a great day as well, but we'll catch each other soon.
All right, talk soon, buddy. Bye.
Bye.